Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's daily meditation. Great to see you all logging on there, saying hello in the sidebar. If you haven't done that already, then please do so. We really do love seeing your messages and seeing everyone's joining in from. And we're back here again with Chiral Lingo. So yeah, today will be similar format to the ones that many of you are very used to by now, starting with a reflection, going into some meditation, and then finishing off with the opportunity to ask questions. 2 ways to ask questions. As ever, there is the opportunity to come on screen and put your question to Chiral in person. We would warmly invite you to do that, just because it gives Chiral a bit more of an opportunity to understand your question with a bit more nuance, and also just because it's really nice to see some of your faces. We recognise many names in the sidebar, but it's really lovely to actually see some of you. So if you'd like to come on screen, just let me know by putting a message in the sidebar and I can bring you on. Alternatively, as ever, you can put a question in the ask a question box. So you'll see it says ask a question there underneath the video screen. Click on that and you can pop your question in that box. So that's the questions. The other thing to mention is dana, or donations. We only receive money from you. You're the only place that we get income from, so you guys' contributions. And we do have ongoing running costs that are pretty substantial. We do need to meet them on an ongoing basis, which is why we mention dana every day. If you're able to give anything, we would be really grateful. It makes a huge difference to us. You can donate easily by clicking on the green dana button underneath the video screen there. Whether it's a large amount or a small amount, every little bit that you can give really makes a difference. It helps us pay for this platform, hosting our website, software we use, other admin costs that we have. Yeah, it really is important to stress how many costs there are to bring this to you every day. It doesn't just happen for free, unfortunately. So yeah, anything you're able to give, very much appreciated. And also, if you're not in a position where you can donate financially, of course, you are really welcome to attend here as often as you'd like to, and access the recordings as often as you'd like to as well. And anything that you give, half of what you give us will go to Chiral to support her as well. So with that said, I'm going to take myself off, hand you over to Chiral.
Thank you, Caroline. Welcome, everyone. So it's good to be together, and yeah, I hope you're all feeling this sense of connection, or at least a sense of welcome as we come back together. So today I wanted to kind of continue a little bit from yesterday, but more in the exploration of how to take care of our hurt. This was a question that someone put in the box of questions the other week. And for me, it's very connected to this larger exploration of why we're seeing this kind of widespread violence and lack of respect for human life that we touched on yesterday. So and it helps us, I hope today we can explore how our own individual story is connected to this larger phenomena, this larger system that we're all a part of. that harms people. So reflecting on this state-sanctioned violence that we've been seeing in police brutality in the US, but it's in many places. To me, the root of this is unhealed collective and individual trauma and unhealed intergenerational trauma. So people can only oppress and kill others when they're cut off from themselves and from their bodies, cut off from their emotions, from their own humanity. And others can only watch that and be silent in the face of that kind of harm and dehumanizing action when we or they are cut off, when we're cut off from ourselves, from our pain, from our own emotions. So there's a real disconnect that's at the core of this, racialized killings and tragedy. But it applies to any kind of oppression as well. So for those of us who may be bystanders, observing, seeing this happen, we know it's wrong, but because there's this disembodiment, it's very hard to speak out against it, to stop it, because we're not fully in our bodies. We're not fully present to what's happening inside of us, which is a result of our own personal pain, our own personal loss that we haven't metabolized, the trauma we haven't really worked through, and like all the ungrieved grief, all the unmourned pain. So all of that gets stuck inside, and it's not just from our life, it could be from previous generations of people being abused, of people being oppressed, of our ancestors not grieving their grief, and so they pass on the trauma, the pain from one generation to the next. So this is a quote from James Baldwin, who says, "I imagine one of the reasons people cling to their hates so stubbornly is because they sense once hate is gone, they will be forced to deal with pain." So it's a kind of protective, so let me tell you about this wonderful book. Some of you may know it. It's called My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem, Racialized Trauma and the Pathways to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies. So it's a book that's really focused on, it's set in the US context, and it's really speaking to Black people, white people, and police. So those are the three kind of identities that it's trying to address. And I actually, with a friend, led an 8-week Dharma-based book study of this book this spring, which we plan to do again in the fall in case you'd like to study with us. But this book has some really wonderful understandings of how trauma works. And one of the terms Resmaa Menakem uses is that when any group doesn't heal its own trauma, or any person, it becomes something that you then, what he calls, blow through other bodies. So the police officer kneeling on George Floyd's neck had trauma from his own personal life, from his own ancestors, that was not processed, that was not acknowledged. And so it gets targeted. It gets blown through another body in the most unconscious way, right? Like he was kneeling on this man's neck for 8 minutes with his hands in his pockets. He didn't even touch George Floyd. He was so disconnected from what he was doing, from all the pleas, all the cries, all the bystanders telling him, you know, he's bleeding now. He lost his bladder. I mean, like very clear indications. And he still, after he wasn't moving anymore, he still stayed kneeling on his neck for 3 more minutes. So that is trauma from one person not being processed and being blown through another person's body, right? Like whatever we don't take responsibility for, whatever pain we're not able to process, it comes out as violence in words, in deeds, to other bodies. And what's so beautiful about this book, and maybe of interest to a lot of you all on the call today who are from European ancestry, is he really tracks back to the reason whiteness developed in the US and violence became such an important part of control, you know, in a time of slavery and in genocide towards Native Americans. The reason that kind of violence could be perpetuated didn't just start in the Americas, that white people who that actually was not even a concept. When Europeans came over to the US, whiteness got constructed as an identity. But anyway, for Europeans, before they came to the Americas, there was extreme violence that was perpetrated on, you know, one English person to another English person, one Spanish person to another Spanish person, and often along, you know, class lines as well, or religious lines. But, you know, public torture, public executions, all of that was commonplace. People were used to seeing that. They were deeply traumatized by the violence, the public violence that was the norm in the Middle Ages. So his you know, thesis in this book is that unhealed trauma then got replayed in many different ways, and it became part and parcel of a new concept of whiteness that had this unhealed trauma from brutality and dehumanization in Europe that then got blown into bodies of color in the US. So the real healing comes when each of us as individuals make space for our own grief, for our own loss, to be present for it, to tend to the ways we've been hurt, the ways we've hurt others. And that's how we lessen these patterns of disembodiment, this phenomena that allows one human to brutalize another human because we're cut off from our own pain. So if we can turn towards it, feel it, make space for our grief, make space for our hurt and our loss, then we are fundamentally more integrated. If we can be with our own vulnerabilities, then we won't hate those that are vulnerable around us. Do you see how that works? That if we hate parts of ourselves because, you know, we feel ashamed or we feel, you know, guilty, we'll turn that hate on others. But if we can come towards ourselves with more understanding and heal that trauma, that you know, it come to some understanding and acceptance of the vulnerability, then we don't have a need to scapegoat other humans. So when we see their vulnerability, we can meet it with compassion because we've been practicing to meet our own vulnerability with compassion. So it's so important to come into our bodies, which is a really powerful effect, can be, of this practice of mindfulness. And it's important because the disembodiment is, and this being cut off from ourselves, it's at the root not only of white supremacy, but also patriarchy, homophobia, transphobia, misogyny, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, all of our ways of othering other people. They're rooted in this fundamental disconnect between us and ourselves, between us and our pain. So I'm going to offer us a guided meditation. It comes from the nonviolent communication work. And it's on mourning. It's an invitation to be with our own pain. And I offer it in light of the events of this past week as a really important part of healing the collective and ancestral pain that we all carry. Because once we're no longer living in a state of accumulated individual pain and hurt, the ancestral and intergenerational hurt can begin to arise and be healed also. So it's like once our own gunk, the stuff that doesn't make the pipes flow can be cleared out, then previous generations of gunk, of pain can, now it has space to come out, and then the whole thing can start to heal. So we become a transformer when we do this kind of work, not just for ourselves, but for our ancestors, clearing out generations of stuck trauma so that it can flow through and no longer, clog up the pipes of our own will and our collective will to protect each other, to cherish each other, including everyone without exception. And I think that is really the fundamental wisdom that is in each of our hearts. It's each of our deepest longings. We know how to do this. We know how to be in community with each other, to cherish each other, to see each other's full humanity. But it's covered over unless we do this work of healing, of clearing. It's covered over and we can't access it. And then we keep repeating situations of harm. So this is the meditation. There's a little reflection to begin. It's a mourning and forgiveness exercise. And the aim is to free up the energy we use to protect ourselves from painful past events so that it becomes available to meet present needs. So there's a little thing before the meditation begins, and that's to recall a painful past event. So if you could bring to mind a past event that continues to bring about some anxiety, shame, or an urge to protect or defend yourself. The incident may consist of something you did or something that happened to you. So, I invite you to take maybe a minute or two quietly to just see what comes to mind. And if you have something to write with, you could write it down if you find that helpful. So the object of the exercise is not to cultivate forgiveness toward others, but to reclaim our power to serve our own needs. Can you hear me now? Okay. And thank you for the note. It's a good reminder that we may bring up the our memory would be not the most painful thing we've experienced, but maybe like a 5 or a 6 on a scale of 1 to 10, so that it's not overwhelming. And thank you for Clive for letting me know where it froze. So yeah, so the aim of this practice is not to cultivate forgiveness toward others, but to reclaim our power to serve our own needs. And so here are some centering strategies. If during the meditation you do experience any overwhelm of memories or emotions, you can try one of these 3 practices. So you can return and connect with your breath, noticing breathing in and out, receiving and letting go of each breath. Another option is you can focus on some details of your memory that carry no emotional significance. And like the color of the chair in that time you were in that memory or something. And then a third option is, as we move through the exercise, you'll be summoning the presence of a being who for you is non-judgmental and capable of keeping you safe today. So if you become overwhelmed, you can pause, notice what you're experiencing, And in your mind's eye, speak to this being that makes you feel safe, telling them what you're feeling in this moment, either emotionally or physically in your body. So I hope that all makes sense. So those are 3 strategies: your breath, noticing a detail that doesn't carry an emotional weight, or letting this being that helps you feel safe know, telling them how you feel, what's happening in your body or in your emotions. Okay. So we'll begin the practice. Sitting comfortably with your spine elongated and also in a restful position. Making any necessary adjustments to support your body. Focus your attention inward by dropping your gaze to the floor in front of you or closing your eyes. And begin to focus your attention on your breathing. Experiencing yourself receiving the breath and letting go of the breath. Now imagine yourself in a place where you feel safe and free. Take time to make yourself comfortable there and to notice your surroundings. Return to your breath, noticing yourself breathing in and breathing out, receiving breath and letting go of breath. If at any time during this practice you notice any resistance to the process, try to give space to that. Honor your experience as it is with a gentle awareness. Now bring to mind a being in whose presence you feel completely safe. This being is powerful and able to protect you. They welcome you with unconditional love, fully accepting you just as you are. Invite this being to join you in the safe place you chose earlier. When you're ready, tell the loving being about the event you recalled and perhaps wrote down. Describe what happened. And remember, if you begin to feel overwhelmed, you can pause and use one of these centering strategies. Going back to your breathing, receiving and letting go of the breath. Or focus on a detail that has no emotional significance. Or center your attention on the here and now, on what you're feeling and on the sensations in your body. And tell the protective being what is happening for you right here, right now. You can continue with these centering strategies, or if you feel ready, you can return to the story you were describing, to the compassionate being. When you've completed your sharing, take a moment to notice what it feels like to be empathically received by the compassionate being. Now, as you recall the incident, tell the compassionate being what you were needing during that time. What universal needs and values were prominent for you in the situation you described? Notice the deep appreciation with which the compassionate being is receiving the needs you just named. Imagine them embracing the needs with tenderness and respect. Stay here together, recognizing the preciousness of your needs. Now you're being asked whether you would like to receive this need into your heart where it will be treasured. If you say yes, notice yourself receiving this valuable quality, allowing either yourself or the compassionate being to place it carefully into your heart. If you're not ready to receive it, watch the compassionate being bring it into their own heart, where it will be kept safe for you. Now check in with yourself. What do you feel and need right now in this moment, having had this experience with the loving being? If you wish, share your feelings and needs with this friendly presence who has accompanied you in this exercise. Notice how gently this being receives each of your needs, regarding each with great care. If you're able, join them by taking a moment to cherish the needs you just identified. Otherwise, simply notice how they are being valued. Now the being is asking you whether you wish to place the needs you just named in your own heart. If you say yes, place them in your heart with care. Otherwise, watch the compassionate being put your needs lovingly into their heart, where they will be carried for you. As you prepare to take leave, tell the loving being how you have experienced your time together. Let them know if you'd like to connect again. Now bid goodbye to the being whom you've identified and invited for this journey. Recall the two sets of needs you identified during this practice. The needs you had during the incident that you recalled, and the needs you have now. Can you imagine yourself holding both of these needs with equal care? When you're ready, we'll come back and open our eyes if they were closed. I invite you to look around, including behind you. Notice what's in the space around you, above and below. And welcoming each other back, knowing that we're each holding cherished needs and values. So I welcome you to share whatever you'd like in the chat of what you experienced or what you discovered. And you're welcome to put a question in the question and ask a question area, or come on to ask a question in person as well. Nice to read your comments coming in. for those of you saying you wanted to stay with the compassionate being, I'll include a link for this practice so you can do this again. You could record yourself and then play it back, or watch the recording again. And you don't have to say goodbye forever to that being. Thank you, everyone. So here is a question from Betty. What if you have a need to explain yourself to others, but they don't want to hear for whatever reason? Thank you for that question, Betty. So, in this practice, we can share our need with the wise being, and the wise being is the one that listens and receives our need. So in this practice, if that feeling is really strong of like, I really want to explain and want others to hear me out, and if that's not possible from them for whatever reason, or they're not willing to, really letting that wise being that's with you, that compassionate being, hold that longing to be heard, to be understood, to really affirm that need that you have. And, I think the power of these practices, these more inner practices, is that it is possible to find reconciliation in ourselves. This is what Thich Nhat Hanh says, that reconciliation takes place within oneself, first and foremost. And so if we can come to terms with our own need to be understood, if we can offer that to ourselves in some sense, whether it's through a loving being that holds us with unconditional love, or it's ourself that is knowing we did our best. We may have made a mistake, or we may have, disappointed others, or they've misunderstood us. And maybe they're not ready or able to hear us out, but we know what was in our heart. And so we take care of that need to be understood by really being with it, by really being there for it, to hold it, to rock it, to soothe it. So we can't always get that from other people, right? Because they're not always able to give us that understanding, but we can surround ourselves with that understanding. And then what another person does or doesn't do has less power over us. It causes less suffering if they can't understand us, if they're not willing to hear us out. But having said all of that, another possible, another way to approach it is perhaps to see if they would be ready to listen to you through some other avenue. Maybe a letter, if you haven't done that already, or maybe a third person who might help, share your perspective to them on your behalf. If you really feel like, sometimes it's like some basic key information that they aren't open to, but if they could hear, it could shift things. Sometimes that's the case. So that could be something, is just to see if there's some way you could have them hear you through some other means than speaking to them, if they're not open to that. But sometimes even we do all the explaining we can do, and still they don't understand. Still they can't see it from our perspective. And so it's important to really be able to come back and take care of ourselves and understand ourselves. And in this exercise, allowing this really loving, compassionate being to receive our need for understanding and really nod its head and say, yes, yes, you deserve that. I understand that. I'm holding that deep need with you. You don't have to hold it by yourself. So to really feel that, to let that in, that there is a part of you that can be there for yourself, And it doesn't only have to come from outside in order for you to be okay. Yeah. Does that speak to your question, Betty? I hope that addresses. Yeah, it's beautiful to read what you all are sharing. So we have more time if there's more questions or if someone wants to come on screen. Great, Betty. Mm.
Mm.
Oh, it's wonderful to read your shares. So here's another question from Lisa. I currently feel a lot of tension between wanting to feel my feelings and be in my body, but at the same time, that makes me feel very vulnerable. And I feel like I need my shell, like I need to be in a shell to survive. Thank you for this question. I think for many of us, there is this feeling that we need to be in a shell, that especially if we have been hurt in some way, if our vulnerability was not protected, not respected, then we had to grow a shell to protect ourselves. And so the invitation to come out of that shell can feel a bit threatening because it's our shell that has kept us safe when maybe in times we weren't safe. But it may be that now the danger is past and that shell may be something from another time that isn't needed in the same way now. And so in cases like that, we can, explore, are there things that are trying to reach us that can't reach us through that shell? And might it be safe enough to come out of our shell? We don't have to leave the shell completely. We can always go back in if we need to. We can go back and pick it up again. But it maybe for the duration of the meditation, we could see how it would feel to let this loving being hold our vulnerability with us. So we're not having to do it by ourselves, but we're letting this being that's so super loving and would never hurt us, we're letting that vulnerability come out in their presence because it's safe with them. And then if we want, at the end of the meditation, we can go back and pick up the shell. So we can play with that. We can play with times where we feel safe enough to release the shell. And then times when maybe that shell is still important and we do need some kind of a protection. So we could also play with what would it mean for that shell to become more of a shield so that it could be, there in a certain situation, but we can also put it down when we don't need it, right? So it's not like enveloping us if we don't need that, but it's just available to protect us in specific situations. And so, we really want to go at the pace of our own unfolding. We don't want to move faster than is right for us. So even if just coming out of the shell a little bit is what feels right, and still with most of us being in the shell, that's okay. We can just come out a little bit and see what that's like. So maybe it's a matter of trust, growing that trust that we come out a little bit and we can go back. We come out a little bit more later and we can go back into the shell. So like just exploring like what creates safety, what kind of environment can we be in with others, say, or with nature that allows us to come out of our shell and still feel safe. So maybe it's like building, preparing, laying the ground for environments that support us to be vulnerable. Maybe we need to think about that, like calling a friend, going someplace really beautiful, and there we can experience our vulnerability. I'm saying like real, daily life practices we could do. So maybe it's like getting in the tub, and that's where you can sing a lullaby to yourself, or let tears come, or let yourself feel that vulnerability is in a protected space. So you could play with like coming out of the shell, but still being in a protected place that's a little bigger than the shell. Maybe it's other people, maybe it's nature, maybe it's time. Choosing a space and time where you have enough time to let the vulnerability come up. Maybe through journaling, or just really letting a whole day be free where you can just be there with yourself. So there's different ways we can grow the shell so it gets bigger. Yeah, thank you for that very tender question, Lisa. And here's a question from Kathy. Will probably be the last one we can take, and it's: imagining a being or a force offering unconditional love is difficult for me. In the past, it would have been the Christian idea of God the Father, but that no longer holds for me. Can you suggest anything in terms of conjuring the wise, compassionate being? Yes, thank you, Kathy. Very important question. So this is quite common. Also, just this is the case for many people, but it's not always easy to bring an unconditional being to mind. So it could be that there was someone in your life that created a moment of care for you that was even very small. Could be a stranger that smiled to you on the street, or a teacher you had as a child that you felt loved by, or just even a particular moment that was really sweet with someone. And maybe, there were other moments that weren't always the best, but that moment was really precious. So if bringing to mind a moment that evokes a sense of being cared for, kind of helps to open the heart, then it's almost like that one instant of care becomes the space or the person or the, the energy field in which you can share your need, you can tell this story, you can express this pain. So it could be, you know, a moment in time that then is the container for your opening to this vulnerable experience, this painful experience. It could also be an imaginary being. You could, you know, that's the first part where you go to a place where you feel safe. It doesn't have to be a place that actually exists. It could be in your imagination. And so that being could be an animal that you resonate with, that has this sense of unconditional love for you. It could be a tree, it could be space, it could be a sound, it could be music, it could be a color or a texture. It could just be like softness or warmth, or, you know, a cloud that envelops you in some, you know, way that's wished for. So you could just kind of let yourself play with that. Like, maybe there's something you really liked as a child, like looking at clouds, or you liked a particular music, or there was some experience you had as a child that helped you feel really safe or really cozy or comfortable. And maybe that can morph into a being, whatever that good experience was, like a tree that you loved, that could become the being. So you could let yourself kind of go into a bit of a more childlike stream of consciousness mind state, and just see if some being that evokes that feeling of, I can feel really protected here, will come to mind. Or even something you experienced in a dream, a being or an experience you had. So we can source this being from many different places. So I hope that's helpful. And if it doesn't come to mind as a being, it could be a place, not just a tree or a rock, but like a field or a mountain, or, you know, an area. So thank you for that question, Kathy. Hope it's helpful. Okay. I see someone has chosen Batman. That's wonderful. I love it. We can draw from so many different sources. And what a good protector Batman is. Wonderful. Thank you so much, everybody, for this time and for going on this journey together, exploring this. Wishing you a good day, good rest of your day, and we'll see you tomorrow, hopefully. Take good care.